So my name is Retief Gerber. I'm an entrepreneur. At the moment I'm on a bit of a holiday because I'm suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic startup disorder. Some of the realities of creating a startup. So the main aim of my talk is obviously to get some feedback on the things that we've learned the hard way. So that should probably have included some swear words, but I've tried to keep it clean. So this is the point where we are here at the moment, where we've got basically two choices. I'll let you read that. I've got some red and blue pills here. I'll give it. You can take. If the one that you want is no longer there, then just don't take the option that you don't want just because it's the only one available. Lesson number one. I'd like to have a look afterwards to see what people think. So I'm here to tell you the truth and how we experience things, because obviously some of the things that we've learned along the way. So while they're getting the pause, I'll just explain a little bit the experiment to what it took to get to that point. As I prepared for the talk, I saw the importance of weighing up this romantic idea of startups and what happens when you go out there. So I thought I'll go to the pharmacy and I'll get some red and blue pills, not a problem. So the first thing I did is I consulted the Oracle, which they've commercialized as Google, to see what I can find. So obviously, being based in South Africa, it's all medicine you can buy in the States, so that doesn't help me. But they did say that you could dye just normal gel capsules. I thought, okay, I'll do an experiment. So I had some of them, did it, worked fine. Went to the pharmacy. I had 3 different pharmacies trying to find me the right pills. We could only find the red one. There was an obvious blue one, but I needed a prescription for that. So if you're looking for something, there's a market for blue pills. So they were really trying to help me. We could only find the red one. So I said, no, fine, I've gone and tested my experiment. I can dye these things. So I bought a big canister of pills, got the dye, went home, and the ones that I bought wouldn't dye for nothing. They just stayed the same color. So that's sort of part of the realities of startups. Where you think something is going to work a certain way, you do something small, you go on and try it later on, and it just doesn't work out. So the main thing, obviously, to start a business is not easy. Otherwise, we would all have businesses, and we would all have been successful in the world. It would have been a much better, much fairer place, but it isn't. So the failure rates on startups is incredibly high. You can't get exact stats because people typically don't want to tell you. But my best guess at the moment for South Africa, for even moderately successful, so that's not going bust, is 1 out of 25. So 4%. That's not a failure, that's a whitewash. So if you're starting something, the best thing that you can do for yourself is to accept that the first couple has got a very high likelihood of failure. And then it becomes easier to work from there. And then you change your mindset and then you approach it slightly different. And I'm going to give some ideas of what you can do. So I've been involved in a number of failed startups. I've been in a number of failed products. So I have a real interest in why the hell does this happen? I mean, we do so many things. Why are we so terrible at this? So we need to figure out what we can do. Because at this point, at 1 in 25, venture capital cannot make money, which means it's going to get more and more difficult for entrepreneurs to get access to funding, and it's already quite difficult in society. So we need to get that to about 1 in 10. At about 1 in 10, your VCs can start making money. Okay. But we also need to be realistic, because that's the nature of the game. That is, that's why everyone don't have businesses and why everyone isn't successful. Going to show you a little bit on the rabbit hole. I was involved with NioCAD. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we did, our failures and our successes. I'm going to talk a bit about a product entrepreneur, because everything that I'm saying is on the basis of a product entrepreneur. That's a specific kind of person with a specific kind of business trying to solve a specific kind of problem. So I have no knowledge of other types of businesses, and I don't want to make any statements about them. So I want to keep it on what we're dealing with. A little bit of the real world issues, and then I'll talk a little bit about the lean startup. So what did we do at NioCAD? We developed ED and CAD tools, design tools for superconductive electronic circuits. So it's pretty high tech, pretty out there. So why did we do EDA? Because it's a major stumbling block for that technology to go anywhere. And we had a very strong software development background, and we did research in that field, so it was a nice fit. Why superconductivity? Because it was our field of research, and it has got a lot of real-world application and real-world advantages. For example, if you look at data centers at the moment, they're consuming 2% of world power. 2%, just data centers. We're not talking about smelters, mining, all that sort of thing. 2% is a big portion of the power consumption. So if you can improve the efficiency of those things, and superconductivity has the promise of doing that by a factor of 100, you're going into the noise, then it's not an issue anymore. Incredibly high speed, so your communication, telecommunication speeds will go up. So internet bandwidth, all these things, much better. You can also make incredibly sensitive sensors, which has also got very interesting cameras, looking very far into space, all sorts of things that get a lot of people interested. And then also we believed, and still believe, that it's going to be the next big thing. It's still something that's on the up. Isn't that? Obviously, when that's going to happen is still the big unknown question. I think if you going into an industry where you can see something is going to happen and you can't yet say exactly when it's going to happen, or it's already started, then do it as a side project or just play around so that you can stay up to date. So we started in 2003, 2004. We started with proof of concepts, prototypes. We actually got contacted by a group in the States, so we already saw, okay, maybe there's an idea here. We started with business plans. You know, we literally spent 4 years developing business plan. One of our business plans was more than 100 pages long. The budget was 60 million, and we were just seeing stars in our eyes and said, we're going to be Google. It's going to be nothing with what the amount of money we're going to be making. But we spent most of the time talking to the wrong people. So we actually in the end got funded in 2007, and that sort of when Inwifus got properly started to where they are now. So the important thing is you are all very lucky being in this environment with everyone around, everyone having a little bit better of an idea of what's going on to help you, to keep you on track so that you don't have to wait 4 years. So don't take what you have here for granted, and don't ask, why are they want to take part of my business? Why are they this? Why are they telling me all these strange things? I'm not saying everything they do is perfect, but that's better than what we had at the time. So in 2007, we started as a project within the university. We got some commercial or professional developers involved. So we didn't start it as a student project. We wanted to make a commercial product. It was also the funding was for technology advancement with the aim of being able to commercialize it. So this phase of the project went quite well. I mean, when you're a technical person, it's very easy to deliver on technical milestones, and so we were busy developing a prototype. We already started marketing it. We saw that there were interest. So it went pretty well. So in 2009, we got further funding. We spun out as a private company. And then we really got to, now we need to get this thing out, we need to get people using it, we need to get it sold. So in 2011 we released our first, call it commercial version, and then in 2012 our second version that we were then trying to sell to people. And this is an international business, so we immediately collaborated with people in Germany, the States, France, Japan. They were sending us some of their source code, what they needed. They really, they were really backing us quite a bit. And then On top of that, we also had people from Australia, Turkey, and China. So this thing went everywhere in the world, which was a major headache because for a company with 5 or 6 people to deal with 10 different countries is a nightmare. Just one example, in most of the countries, after the client has signed, I want this tomorrow, took a year before that money was on our bank account. Just because you had to work with all the regulations of dealing with it. And this is a software product, so it doesn't even go through all the import and export things. There's a side channel there that you don't have to go through all of that requirements as well. So, point there is, if you're going to start something, you have to have a South African market that would be able to sustain you. And once you figure out what you're doing and how to do it, then you can start scaling it to other parts, one country at a time. Obviously, everyone, when they saw this business, they thought international, big market, yay, and when you actually start implementing it, you start seeing all the headaches that come associated with that. So this is actually our product. We've got a number of world firsts and very unique, very interesting things. You can do your circuit design on hierarchical levels. You can see your simulations, all the analysis on when it's going to work, when it's not going to work, how you set it up. That gets all used by a system that automatically verify if it's working, so that when you manufacture these things, that they will actually work given all the tolerances. Here you can actually see how the current flows through a structure that's got dimensions of 1 micrometer. So that's extremely small. And that's typically a full-scale chip. That's about 5 millimeters by 5 millimeters. So this is, in terms of interface and complexity, probably one of the most advanced tools I've ever seen being developed in South Africa. So technically, we definitely hit the mark. Obviously, we had a few issues and we had a few failures, and they weren't typically very obvious at the time. One of the first thing is our timing. So we had the view that to be able to capture this market, you had to be first. That's business 101. The problem is being first and being early is not the same thing. And there's actually a couple of people that say being early is the same as being wrong. So your idea is not valid if it's too early. And then the thing that really hurt us the most is if you're early and you're a funded startup, you are completely and utterly screwed, because there's just no way of getting around that. Your funders invested in something that will give them a return on investment within a certain scale. They've got a big portfolio, many different businesses, so it either needs to go somewhere or it needs to be killed. That's the 2 options. Idling along is not one of their priorities. So just creating a sustainable business is not really in the interest of investors. So make sure that you're not too early, you're not ahead of what you're trying to do. The second one is the scale of our MVP. Now this is also a term that came out much later, and it's something that you really need to understand, but in principle it took us 4 years to develop our MVP. Now MVP is something that adds value to a client, which they typically will use in a production environment. It's not just a toy, it's not a proof of concept. It's something that needs to add value that they typically want to pay for, depending on what your model for revenue is. Obviously there's difference. But unless you get to that point, you don't have a minimal viable product. So proof of concepts and prototypes is toys. It's great to learn what you should do and whether you can do it, but it's not a product yet. So that took us 4 years, and that's really the first time that you start getting feedback from your clients. So up to that point, we were anticipating and assuming they're going to need this, they're going to want that. This is what they, and a big portion of that was just wrong. And you only get that feedback once people have the thing in their hand and they're using it and they're giving you feedback. One of the problems associated with that is obviously the market is not big, so it's a high value, low volume product. So our minimum price of our first version that we were targeting was about 100,000 Rand. So how do you marry a minimal viable product with wanting to sell it for 100,000 rand? That's a tough one. I don't have an answer yet. I do think you will need considerably more investment to be able to get to that point, because you also can't just give it away for free. So that's something you need to consider with what you want to sell it for and what it's going to take to develop that. Because don't go and set up a plan where you're going to take 5 or 10 years to develop something and then only be able to sell it. The third one, our market understanding. Now, obviously, the research in that area started in 1988 already. So we've been in that industry. We've interacted with those people. It was something that we really understood. It was a market we really thought we understood. But the problem there is we weren't where things were happening, and things were happening all over the place. So one of the biggest problems with the market is that it was hugely segmented. There wasn't one clean market that we could go after. They were actually separate markets needing separate products, and that's something that you need to identify quite early on. So we were too far away from where everything was happening. So it doesn't matter what the business is. If you want to have any chance of success, it really needs to be something where you are involved with it. When I was preparing for the talk, I saw something about a music startup. I don't know if any of them are here or know of them. I don't know them. I just saw that they had made a statement that they had closed down, and they said, we didn't have enough capital to execute on our plan, which I think is not the right explanation for the failure. One of the things they did say is when they started, they combined had 27 hours of experience within the music industry. And the problem is that is not enough to really understand the problem. And I think that's why they failed ultimately. Not because of the capitalists, they didn't understand it. They had a very idealistic view of how things would work from an outside perspective, and you thought, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to be successful. And if you had been involved there for a long time, then your view might have been different. Because if it was that simple, someone that was in there would have already done what you're doing now. So the main thing there is, if you have an idea and it's something out there that you're not really involved with, the chances of actually being successful is very small. Because the likelihood is someone's either already tried it and you just don't know about it, or they know it's things that you don't know. I don't say don't take it on, but make sure that you get behind every little small detail of it. So in terms of the market, the problems we had was accessibility. It was all international here, and the segmentation. It was all split up, and we really needed to develop different products for each one of them. Another one is processing client feedback, and I would think that's probably the most difficult one, because I think we started speaking to potential clients even before we got our first round of funding to try and figure out what's going on, what's happening. It was something we thought we did quite well. I mean, we listened to our clients quite a lot. The key there is to decipher what they are telling you, because they're also not. You really have to go and search to find a client who will give you the real truth, because they're always scared. Tomorrow you want to try and sell me something, so I'm going to not give you everything, so that you can, take me to the cleaners when you realize that this is the be all and end all of my business, and I can charge them anything for it. So the important thing there is, the amount of times we heard, if you add this feature, we will buy your product. And we go, yes, we just go and do it. Come back. Not one of those bastards ever bought a license. That's the sort of thing when people tell you things, you need to go and sit and figure out what are they actually telling. You need to get the story behind the story and then say, okay, we assume this is actually what they're trying to tell us. We need to go and test this in some or other ways. If they tell you we're going to buy this product, then ask them for 10% of the development cost or something. Tell that it will be exclusively for you, or you have to get them to test, are they really going to buy? Because if you just run off and go and do it because they told you they need it, chances are you're not going to buy it. Because in most cases, if it's something new, and that's the area that we work in and I'd like to stay in, is people are quite interested in what you're doing. They quite often participate, and you take that all as good feedback. And you think, okay, I can. And especially if you are hunting something, when they tell you something, and there's one or two people that's saying something negative or something you don't expect or you don't agree with, you can always go and rationalize why they said that. And it's always not the nice people that do it, and quite often they are probably the ones that's more telling you the truth than the people are being nice to you. The other thing is, there's a big buzz going on at the moment about being disruptive. You must think disruptive, be disruptive, have disruptive products, disruptive technologies. But the point is, at some point, you are so disruptive that you're not disruptive at all, because you're not getting any entrance into that market or that field. And that was one of our problems. We said, what they're doing now is crap. This is the way it should be done. This is a fully packaged, fully working, be-all and end-all product. This is what you need to do. Throw all that stuff away, start using this thing. So obviously all the guys that have been working in this field for much longer than we have said, look, we've been struggling and going on with what we've been doing, I'm not going to change now. So immediately your market isn't anymore the people who's in that field doing that product, it's new people coming into that field. So if that field isn't growing tremendously, you're not going to get any access. So there's no point, there's nothing wrong with being disruptive. I just think be disruptive, but first be complementary. So you need to add on to whatever is available currently. So that would have been also my advice to the music guys. They wanted to take on the music industry and say, no, all the artists, leave those people, come with us. You know, it's the whole sharing model, everything. But you know, they've got vested interest on the existing model. So they had to come up, in my opinion, and I really don't know anything about it, with something that would complement what is available at the moment. Then starts getting people over time to realize that there's some value in that system. People are very scared of just doing a switch from one place to the other. They don't like change. I mean, even one of the most successful companies in terms of disruption, in my opinion, is Apple. But the thing that people tend to forget is it took 20 years for Apple's strategy to eventually pay off for them. 20 years is a long time. If you not go about the way that they're going about, or you've got some stable income from some niche group, then it's going to be difficult to be that disruptive. So I think one of the big fails, and that comes in with your cash flow, is the whole sales and sales cycle thing we completely underestimated. Firstly, we're far away. This is a high cost, low volume, so it's very touch intensive. You really need to be there. We typically only saw people once or twice a year. You can't stay up to date with what's going on there. You know, if your sales cycles is a year from when you sign the deal until you get your money. And if you're a startup that only has 2 years of funding, you're in trouble from day one. So that's why it's important to get your sales and things sorted out very early. So get an MVP, start selling it, doesn't matter what it is, so you can figure out, well, what is my cash flow going to look like. You cannot just rely on funding from VCs or whoever the case may be. And then we just weren't lean enough. And that's the problem with that was we had created such a big product that you couldn't scale back or you were too big to be able to make any changes. You need all those people to support it. You need all the people to carry on developing to be able to make progress. So our burn rate was quite high. And then if your sales is slower than anticipated, and I mean from everything I've read or seen or compared, we actually done pretty well. We were on the same order of what other companies that ended up being successful got within the same time frame and the same pricing and a similar type of product. So we didn't do that bad, but we just didn't have the money to continue. Just a few of our successes. And the key point I want to make here is for any startup, there is absolutely no point in focusing on your strengths, because 1,000 successes isn't going to turn the one failure that kills your company into a success. You need to focus on the things that you're bad at. You need to focus on the things that you fail at, because ultimately the fate of your company is going to be decided by those, not by how well you do other things. And that's something we definitely we got wrong quite often. So that's the main thing. So, you know, when a company fails, it's not really worthwhile in bragging on what we did right, because we just did too many things wrong. But I think we did get the technology right. Anyone in our industry that saw it could see, listen, this is the thing, this is the future, this is how it should have been done a long time ago. You know, we want this. Give us some time to figure it out in our head, sort of thing. So I think we got the technology right. You know, for a country like South Africa to get something like that right is quite significant. So we can do these things. There's no question about it. I think we did our marketing very effectively. We started marketing right from the beginning. We were integrated with everyone, every place. Other people said, we've got a conference, we want to use your software, we want to show your software. And we didn't try and promote or push any of that. So our marketing cost us almost nothing, and we were getting contacted by people all over the world with whom we'd never seen that said, look, we want to get a valuation copy, how do we buy this thing? So it is possible to do that very effectively. I think our strategic positioning we also did well. One of the things we tried to do is to say, look, everyone at least acknowledge this is going to be the de facto standard. We wanted to have 100% of the market finish and cloud. And I think everyone also had bought into that vision. The problem with it was too long term. If you didn't sort out your cash flow problems now, you can't be the standard in the future. So you need to focus more on your short-term cash flow than what your end strategic goal is going to be. You know, I think we had an amazing team and an amazing culture in how we created and eventually made the product that we did, and how we thought about things and how we collaborated. But everyone says they've got a great team, but this really was an incredible environment. So I do think we got something right there. But there's a big element of luck to that as well. And then the last one was our network, to get yourself integrated into what domain ever it is that you are in. There was at one point we had to make a very, very strategic decision, and we didn't know the one. So I sent out an email to about 100 people, and I got feedback from every single one. This is CEOs of large companies, directors of large companies, directors of universities, people that you would not usually hear anything from ever. But it was a question that would affect them, and they gave me feedback, and even got other people to give me feedback. So they, at that point, you know that they had considered you as something serious. So I want to talk about the product entrepreneur, which is what I am. When I prepared for this, I couldn't really find anyone that segmented nicely. So a product or a creative entrepreneur is typically an artist, a designer, an engineer, someone who values the product above all, and typically a visionary. So on the other side of that, you've got a services entrepreneur or specialist entrepreneur. So you're a specialist in the field, you're selling your time, that's also an entrepreneur. And you also get facilitation entrepreneur. So that's the sort of people that says, I know this guy, I know that guy, they've got something, we can put it together, package it, and sell something new. So that's more or less, how I would break it up as a product entrepreneur. So there I say this is a new product, typically blue ocean. I just want to add a disclaimer there. Don't confusing it with boiling the ocean. Those are two different things. Don't go and, we typically want to go and change the world. That's a pretty mean feat, so change the small pieces at a time, please. And the important thing there, the typical environmental characteristics is it is hugely unknown. Anything you say about that is an assumption or a guess. I don't care what you say about it. Until you've proven it through some testing, it's completely unpredictable. You cannot say if I do A, B is going to happen. You have an assumption that if I do A, B is going to happen. So, there's a huge starvation or information starvation. You just don't have the information that you typically need to make the decisions. And how do you address that? That was one of our biggest challenges. How do you convince people that this is what we're doing here is right, so that they can, go to their committees and convince them that this is the right way to go. So the right approach to take there is this idea of hypothesis testing. So, scientific hypothesis testing say you need to have a way of testing it to know whether you've got an hypothesis. So if you say, if I'm going to market my product on Facebook, I think it's going to be successful. And you say, how am I going to test it? I'm going to do an experiment where I do something and then afterwards I test. I have a way of testing whether it had an actual impact. But scientific hypothesis testing goes even further than that. It says that test that I did, how do I prove that that is the right test to go and do that? And the reason why I'm moving into that area is because I think scientific experimentation is the only field where failure is also a success. So it's 100 out of 100. I want to be there. I want to get things done that way. So the whole idea is I've got an assumption, I have some hypothesis on that, and that is your business. Your business is a new scientific theory which says this is how I'm going to make money. I'm going to go test it. I'm not going to go and drive and hunt a goal of making money. I say, how am I going to step by step test this process so I can say this is how I'm going to be able to make money. So a product startup then typically starts with a product entrepreneur that's very passionate about the technology. So they typically think technology and the product is the most important thing. So typically technology, and there I would include your prototypes or proof of concepts. It's really the heart of what it is that you do. From there, but for business, obviously, the product is more important than the technology. And what's even more important than that is your product market fit. So can you get people that want this thing, that's going to get value from it, is going to be able to pay you for that. Even more important than that then is what is the size of this market, how accessible is this market, how is this market segmented, how do I understand this market, is even more important than that. And then more important than even that is your cash flow. And at the very end of the scale is scaling. So that's return on investment. So that's typically the part that the VC is interested in. So obviously your product entrepreneur sits at that end of the scale and your investor sits at the other end of the scale. And there's a huge big gap between those two. And I actually call this the proper crossing the chasm, if you've ever read that book. This is the first chasm that you're going to have to cross. The problem is the investor can't come any closer to the entrepreneur, because the closer they get to you, the more risky it gets for them. And as I said, 1 in 25 is already too risky for them to make money. You can still, as an entrepreneur, convince them of your idea. We did it quite successfully. But in the end, it's going to impact the entire industry. It's going to impact everyone. So the next startup they want to start again, the VCs might have walked away and said, this is not something you want to do. So the important thing is, as an entrepreneur, we obviously want to bring those closer together, make that gap a bit smaller. The entrepreneur has to go and get closer to the VC. The entrepreneur has to go and get closer to what the VC needs and where they want to go. Obviously the VC needs to help a bit, and at the moment there's a lot of cross the chasm blaming. The VC says we've got crap entrepreneurs, or we don't have good business plans, and the entrepreneur says they're not giving us enough money. That's not going to help us, that's not going to get us anywhere. It's the responsibility of the entrepreneur to get to the VC. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And just to make it clear, I am not an investor. So I'm not saying it from an investor's perspective, I'm seeing it from the entrepreneur perspective from the things that we had experienced. Everyone has seen that process. That's their view. This is how you create a business. You've got an idea, you create a business plan, you go and get some funding, then you go and do something. They call it commercialization, execution. I still don't know exactly what that is. But you put it in the business plan and say, we're going to do these things and then we're going to make money. The problem with this sort of setup, one of the things, obviously, your business plan that you write for that case is, we've got an idea, I want to convince other people of our ideas, we are making some assumptions and we're rationalizing those assumptions. So they're going to ask you, what assumptions do you make and why is it a valid assumption? So you go and try and rationalize everything all the time. When you're going in an unknown area, you can pretty much rationalize anything. That's the problem. So what should a business plan really be then? It should be your business case, and it should be a statement of all the assumptions that you make and how you're going to go about testing them. So if you make certain assumptions about how I'm going to make money and you go and test them, then you already have a plan of what you're going to be doing. Obviously, things are going to change along the way, and you need to make other plans and then decide how you're going to test that. So the problem with that first approach is you've got your idea here and you've got your money over there. So you literally have one way: either you're going to succeed or you're going to fail. If you've done these things a couple of times, you realize that it's more something like that. You're falling around from one failure to the next, trying to find where you go. And the point is, this success point is not going to be where you thought it was going to be. It's going to be somewhere else. So unless you allow yourself to go through the process of figuring it out, you're not going to get to the right place. And the problem with the first one is, you go to investors, you say, this is the business plan, this is how we're going to do things. They do a due diligence on that business plan, and they say, this is how things are going to happen. And from then on out, that is how everything is going to be governed. Because when the investor does a due diligence, that's the most amount of time they're ever going to spend on the business. So if you're going to go to them later on and say, look, we made a mistake back then, we need to now go there, they're going to say, but we thought everything was sorted out here, we knew where we were going. So tell me why more, and they keep on wanting to know more and more and more details about why you want to change. So my view, at least at this point, is that investors isn't so much risk averse as they are change averse. They don't want to change things once they've pulled the trigger and say, this is what we're going to do, because it just doesn't fit into their business model. They need to decide early on, we're going to try this thing, we're going to throw everything at it, it's either going to succeed or it's going to fail. You know, if we need to spend too much time managing on it, then it doesn't, they just can't make that sort of investment. So now how are we going to get through that issue? So I went and drew this up, and it's based primarily on typically what we do in software development, and I did later on rationalize things by a book that I had found later on. So what I say here is also in a book that I found later on, so it's the truth. So in this case, you start with an idea, you say, I think people are going to want this product. I'm going to test that people want this product. You're going to do something. And you say, if it works, yay or nay. If it doesn't work, then you have to try something else. If they don't want that specific way the product is packaged, you need to try some other way. So you need to prod around your initial idea a little bit to see what people are actually going to be interested in. And that's the sort of experiments you need to go through all the time. This can be done very cost effectively. So then at some point you say, okay, it worked. Then you need to ask yourself, can it scale? Because that's what the investor is interested in. He says, I've now proven that people want this. I've proven that people will pay for it. How can I now draw a picture for a VC that he's going to make money, he's going to get return on investment? So how do I make this company bigger with more profit? So you typically have to do some or other small scale experiments. You say, I've now got 10 clients. I have to figure out what I need to do to make it 100.
And at that point you assume if I can make it 100, I can make 1,000, I can make 1,000, I can make 100 million, whatever you want to do. So if you can't scale it, then you need to go back. So if you create a business that can't scale, don't go and ask the VC for money, keep it something for yourself, keep it as a side hobby. So if it can't scale, you need to go back and repeat that process. So you go through that thing again, eventually say, I can scale this now, then you go to a VC. If they've seen everything you've done up to that point, I can also guarantee you're more likely to get funding from them. And at that point, you also know which direction you need to go, so you're going to have much less issues later on convincing them we need to change the business. Even at that point where you say we can now scale it, you can still have failures. There's still businesses that fail when they want to really scale up. So you might still have to go back that way. And the big thing with this thing is every time you go to the next step, those loops get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it gets more and more difficult to get things done. So as an entrepreneur, definitely, if you want to be successful, you need to try and stay here as long as possible and figure most of the things out before you go and approach the VC. And the main aim of this is you're not constantly trying to chase money in the bank, profits. You're trying to figure out what needs to be done to make the success of this business. And that typically is also much less stressful. So I just want to draw, that's typically the area you want to focus on, and that's where this hypothesis testing comes in. You say, I've got an hypothesis, I need to test it, I want to measure then afterwards whether it's had any impact, has it improved my business in any significant measurable way. If not, then you need to decide, okay, we're going to need to change something, we need to come up with a new hypothesis and restart the process all over again. So there's a bunch of books about that. You can go and read, get a bit more detail about it. On the question of funding, and I get that a lot, and you hear people say we need more investors that's going to give pre-revenue funding. And my answer to that is, even if you're an entrepreneur, pre-revenue funding is a big no. There's just too many unknowns, too many things that still needs to change and to be figured out to take on that additional load of funding. Because if you're not going to be able to make it successful without funding, you're not going to be able to make it successful with funding. Is my view at least. Obviously, I'm in the software space. So if you're in biotech or healthcare or something like that, it's a little bit more difficult to go and do something like that on your own. But that's why there's research funding, and that's a complete different area. There's a big need for that, and there's not enough. So that's someone else's problem. Post-revenue funding, maybe. I think it's not quite, at that point you're not quite ready for investment either. So what is actually the minimum requirement is obviously scalability. Not all businesses or business plans should get investment. Investment is for something that you're going to scale very big, that you need that money for. A lot of businesses is actually just organic businesses that you can just grow and should grow on your own. So exactly what is scalability? So obviously most of your hypotheses have been tested. You should get to a point where you can almost only rely on your gut to make decisions, that you've done so many tests that you can predictably say or guess what's going to happen. You obviously have to have product market fit with revenues. It's very important, so you must have the clients willing to pay. And an important thing is you must use the right metrics to define whether you are actually growing or not. So these days you see a lot of companies say we had 9 million users, we had 10 million users, 11 million users, and then in the background they're actually using all sorts of funny tricks to get the people to sign up. They either have some other competition or some weird thing to get the numbers up. So yes, they've got the numbers there, but the people aren't there for the primary purpose of your business, which means you're lying about those numbers. So you really need to take this very seriously, and you need to dig deep to come up with what are the real measures of success and growth. You had to have done some small scale test and be able to show that you've done that, and it's not just some weird anomaly that you spoke to someone and all of a sudden there were 10 people interested. It really needs to be an experiment that you said, we're going to do this, this is what's going to happen, this is how we're going to measure it and see if it correlates. Then you have a little bit more of an idea of how things are going to work once you have the funding. Just a few thoughts on focus, because that was also something that got to us. It's important to identify your 3 priorities and then throw away number 2 and 3 and only focus on the 1. Because you can firstly apply yourself much better when you only focus on 1. And if you believe in this hypothesis testing idea, then obviously if you're focusing on one thing and doing one experiment at a time, you can say, whatever I did here caused that. So you can always map cause and effect. If you're experimenting with 3 things at the same time and something happens, how are you going to know which one is actually the one that did it? You're going to continue doing all 3 all the time? You would have to do that then, but you're going to be 3 times as inefficient as you could have been. So never spread yourself too thin. And that's, I think, one of the biggest problems with product entrepreneurs is, wait, if you add that, it's going to be nicer. If we do that, it's going to be cooler. And, you quickly add on things, and you have to maintain and take care of all of those things. So eventually you're just running around. You don't have time to think strategically about everything. So in our case, at one point, we were developing a new version of our product. We were trying to hammer the sales in, so we were going at it full tilt. We were trying to secure more funding, and we were trying to sell the company at the same time. I mean, that was 1 or 2 people trying to do all of that. So this is the one thing that stuck. It says companies don't get sold, they get bought. So the idea that I'm going to go and create something that I'm going to sell off to someone isn't going to work. As soon as you're trying to sell something, especially if it's a fire sale, people are just going to back off. So you have to create something with value, and then people will come to you to buy it. And that's still one of the biggest exits at the moment for startups anyway. So what exactly is the lean startup then? Part of that model of using that feedback loops to get yourself more and more ready for when you approach a VC. Obviously is bootstrap, so this is something that you typically do in your spare time. I don't think many of us has got the capacity to go and do that on ourselves. I think that's a huge advantage for people in the States. You can do a second and a third job that doesn't require a lot of your time, and you can earn a decent living and actually focus your time on your product or your business. Opportunities for that in South Africa is not like that. So you're more or less going to have an 8 to 5 job, and you're going to have to do this thing in your part-time. But it's definitely will pay off in the end. I think if you can get your business far enough before you approach the VC, you also can retain a much bigger percentage and more control of what happens with that. So it's definitely in your interest. And then obviously if you're doing this as not on a full-time basis, then the idea of a MVP is much more important, because you really need to be efficient with how you spend your time to get to that first product and to see how people experience it and give it feedback. It's about validated learning. There's a book by Eric Ries, The Lean Startup. Can definitely suggest that you read that, because that was one of the things that I really struggled to convert at the time to our investors, to say, look, they wanted answers. I couldn't give them answers. They said, we can go and do this and see what happens. But that's also an important point from the book, is when you want to measure something, you test something, doing something and saying we're gonna do that and then we're gonna see what happens is not a test either, because it's also always going to be successful, because you're going to see what happens. That's still not going to help you to come to any conclusions. In any lean startup, you need to be agile, and you need to be able to change your mind about your original idea. I see too many people coming up with an idea. They think this idea is the most valuable thing in the world. We did it ourselves. They cling to that, and that's all they want to do. You need to be flexible and say, look, somewhere around that core idea, I'm going to find the spot where I'm going to get the right fit in what I do and what people want. You cannot anticipate that in advance. You can get lucky sometimes, but that's not something you can actually accurately estimate before time. And then a very important thing of the lean startup is your performance metrics. How do you measure how well the startup is doing? And that was always a problem for us because the only thing we were ever measured on is sales, which is important because ultimately that's going to kill your business. But that's not all that you do within your startup. So you need to find the right metrics so that when you tell people we're doing well, or even yourself more importantly, we're doing well or we're not doing well. If you're not doing well, then you need to decide, am I going to pivot or am I going to move on? So in closing, I think NioCAD failed not because we couldn't secure funding, not because the funding landscape wasn't good, because our investors were idiots, or an array of reasons we could blame someone else for. I think we failed because we believed we needed the funding. We had that first model of idea, business plan, funding, do something and make money. That's what we were taught. That's what we were told. Everyone tells us if you want to do something important, you need to get funding to go and do that. And that's utter bull. So because we believed it and we took the funding at the time that we did, when we were still early, we created a business that couldn't survive without that funding. So it really didn't matter what you do. If you didn't have that funding anymore, if you didn't continually get that funding, you weren't going to be successful. So my message is, if you want to create something, go and create. It is difficult, but go and do it. But take your time to figure it out on your own before you go and get too many other parties involved. But get other people to buy into your idea in the beginning and to contribute to it. Don't try and go and do it just you on your own.
You're kind of stuck with a chicken and egg situation. You've got an idea, you've got a product, but there's no viable market there. There's no market there. So how do you do hypothesis testing of the market if there is no market?
Well, if in that case, you obviously have to go and see who's willing to pay for your product. And if you've got a list of people, and we had a list of people, and you go knocking on doors and say, okay, you need to buy a license, you need to buy something now. After knocking down a couple of doors, you're going to realize nobody's interested in buying it. Then you know I don't have a market.
So where's the
the main thing is we went and asked people, are you interested? Will you buy this in the future? And the answer was always yes. But if I go back to them and say, look, I'll give it to you for 100 Rand or whatever the case would be, you buy it now, then you will see whether there's actually a market. That's the big shift. That's at this stage, and that's part of the problem with creating a new product for a new market, is to be able to validate the product. That there is a real interest in the product.
You said NioCAD had failed, so I'm guessing it's no longer. What happened to your product? It looks like you guys were doing sales. So what happens after you fail?
That's unfortunately one of the sad things when you fail is, and in our case, the company has gone dormant. So nobody's doing anything at the moment. We still have people contact us to get licenses and things, so we're just giving them free evaluation licenses at this time. But there's no development going on. So that product is now locked up in an entity that's buried under a pile of dust. And none of the shareholders is willing to say, okay, this has failed, let it go. They still have it as an asset on their books. So it's sort of the view. We were early, so in 5 years, let's see if we can revive this. Unfortunately, with software, that's never going to happen. So that's still one of the struggles we're having with investors. And that's the big thing. If a product is going to fail, it's dead. And in our case, and it's going to happen in most cases, you're going to sign some other restraint of trade because they don't want any competition for your business. So you're not allowed, I'm not even allowed to go and do something in that field at this point.
And you don't have a pivot either, like pivoting the product in a new direction, like 30%.
Look, I mean, this is just a brief thing of what was going on.
Okay.
I mean, we tried many different alternatives, going more into the hardware, going into conventional electronics, going into other areas, going into consulting, custom development. You know, we went through the whole array of things, and you still have to convince your investors that this is the way to go. You know, in most of those we weren't successful in convincing them that is the way to go. And for most of the alternatives that we had, they weren't really viable either, because you'd have a year, maybe 18 months to do something, and you're pretty much restarting from scratch again. That's why it's so important to do it as early on as possible, when it costs the least amount of money and when it's the easiest and quickest to change. Because our product was about 3 million lines of code. To then go and adapt it to something else, that's a big task. So if you couldn't make it in the area that you were in already, to go over to something outside, I mean, it's probably just as likely to fail.
And during your talk, you mentioned that at some point you wanted to sell your company, but
yes.
I don't understand why would an entrepreneur want to sell a high potential business to someone else?
Well, it wasn't me trying to sell the company; it was the shareholders trying to sell the company. They weren't at this stage. Well, one of the investors did want to do a follow-on round of funding. It was already approved, and we actually rejected it, saying, look, we can't go on the business plan that we went on before. We need to change things. And the negotiations just took too long. We ran out of money and go. Selling the business was the shareholder saying, he's one of the major shareholders, we're not interested anymore. Let's see if we can sell it to someone else. Maybe they can take it on again. So that wasn't the entrepreneur's choice.